You teach at Russell Sage College in Troy, New York.
Yes.
So I want to understand that, and I understand that it's an undergraduate college for women. Could you tell us something more about Sage College?
Sure. Well, the SAGE colleges are actually a group of colleges that are all under the heading of the SAGE colleges. It includes SAGE College of Albany, that's coeducational. The SAGE Graduate School, which is sort of like what you have here at Go University with the graduate curriculum and graduate programs, and then Russell Sage College. And so I've taught in the graduate school some in English education, but primarily I teach at the Women's College. So it's an undergraduate women's college. It was established in 1916, so we just had a centennial celebration last year. We're a very small school, all women, as you noted. And it's one of only, I think, about 30 women's colleges left in the United States. There are not very many of them. But it's a very interesting one because it was created as a response to the fact that the earlier women's colleges were very elite for people with a lot of money. And so Russell Sage College was trying to provide an education that was both in the liberal arts but also practical. And so young women would come if they wanted to be teachers and if they wanted to be nurses. They would get a full sort of rich college experience and get the training in the practical art. And so we still have this emphasis at the college on applied learning and learning how to take what you're learning in the classroom and think about how it's going to help you to be a better participant in the world. Like our motto is to be, to know, to do, right? So there's this focus on global citizenship and being a woman of influence, using what you know to help
Others.
Yeah.
So your PhD title was Skirts Must Be Girded High, Spaces of Subjectivity and Transgression in Post-Suffrage American Women's Travel Writing. So what is all that about? There's a lot of words there.
What is all that about? Well, the beginning of the title is a quote from a very obscure book of women's travel writing by a young woman who was driving from Boston to Santa Barbara with some friends in the 1920s. And so Skirts Must Be Girded High was actually a quote about hiking through Zion, which is a national park in the United States. And as you can imagine, there then, as here now, lifting up the skirt was seen as sort of a suggestive and racy thing to do, but also a practical thing to do. If you're hiking in a creek, you need to pull the skirt up. So a lot of what I looked at was the ways that women who were traveling could transgress and do these things that were maybe a little flirtatious, maybe a little wild, maybe a little unconventional, and they would cloak them by talking about how, well, they must be girded high. How am I going to hike if I don't pull my skirt higher, right? And how that becomes a kind of a coded way to both play with the audience and say I have a right to do this and to transgress a little, but also to make a very real statement about needing to lift the restrictions on women and sort of move toward a more unrestricted movement for women. So I look at women in the United States traveling cross country with girlfriends. I look at women traveling to India by themselves, traveling to China by themselves, traveling to Britain by themselves. And my focus is really on women just after suffrage in the United States. These women who now have the right to vote, and many of them have an education. Where do they go? And how do they use travel to expand their sense of who they are and what they can do? And how do they define themselves in relation to other people? So none of my women traveled with men. That was key. It's sort of what happens when you leave behind what's supposed to make you feel safe and comfortable, and you have to figure things out and find yourself in a new context.
So in terms of Goa, how has your experience been so far? You know, have you visited any spots, any special places you wanted to see, or something like that?
Well, so far, I've really stayed here. I'm living in a flat kind of near Miramar.
Okay.
So I've walked around a lot in Hanjin and taken the bus about a little bit, but I haven't gone anywhere beyond the university, the market. I went to the Inox for part of the film festival. I haven't done any of the tourist things yet. I'm just figuring out how to walk to the grocery store and get my groceries and, you know, finding the yoga studio and doing all of the things that constitute day-to-day living, right? Getting my books, learning how to take the bus, cooking. So soon I would like to venture out, see some beaches, you know. I hear, you know, there are beautiful places, beaches, spice plantations, museums. I know that all of these things are here, but so far I'm just getting to know Panaji and finding my way around.
So far you've had 2 classes with the literature students, and could you tell us your initial assessment, if any?
Well, I'm struck by how quiet the students are when I ask questions. I think maybe they're getting used to me. I think maybe they're not used to being asked a lot of questions, but I hope to sort of move the students in that direction of participating with me. I think the class is a lot more interesting if the questions that students have and their curiosity about the literature and the culture and the history, a lot of which is new to them, if that is more foregrounded in the class, you know, I think they will get more out of it. I will get more out of it because I will understand what does this literature look like to someone coming from a Goan perspective, right? What questions do you have when you encounter these curious stories about Puritans, right? What is familiar? What is nonsensical to you, right?
So you're here through the Fulbright Nehru program, and
Yes.
why did you choose India as your destination for teaching?
So, as I mentioned, I wrote in the dissertation about some travels to India. And in recent years, I've given several conference papers about American women who traveled to India in the early part of the 20th century.
Lady Sahib, I think I saw
Yes.
those titles. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Lady Sahib is one. That's Grace Seton Thompson, right? So I just came to be curious about India. I know that India today is very different from India. Obviously, almost 100 years ago, the writers I'm reading most were writing, but some even earlier than that. But I became curious. I thought this would be an interesting place. The fact that English is a language of teaching is essential for me. My only other language is Spanish, and it's very bad. I speak very, very bad Spanish. So that was a consideration. But mostly, I think I've just read so much about India, you know, and you hear so many stories about India, and you see such simple depictions of India, right? India is either the land of spiritual enlightenment for the tourist, or it is this terrible place where, you know, women are oppressed, you know. And I feel like these are the two images you have of India. And so it makes you curious, right? What is India really like? It's huge, it's diverse. It can't just be those two things. So it seemed a good place to come and learn more about American literature by hearing about it and sharing it with other people from another culture.
Okay. So as part of the program, you had to submit a project. while processing your application. And your title, the title of your project was Remapping Identities, American Literatures of Encounter, Place, Community, and Self.
Yes.
So what was that about? I mean, why did you choose that topic?
Well, I think range of things. And one is that I do find that this issue of contact zones and the ways that different cultures meet and shape each other sometimes through conflict, sometimes through oppression, but always all being reformed and reshaped by that contact, is a very important issue in American literature. It is American literature is born out of Christopher Columbus's journals and Cabeza de Vaca's journals, writing about Native Americans, and the Native American tales about Christopher Columbus and Cabeza de Vaca and the others who come. And then you have these sequences of encounters of different cultures trying to sometimes vie for and fight over their right to exist, sometimes trying to learn from one another and create a sort of more complex, peaceable nation. And I think that theme of encounter and place and identity is central to all of American literature. It's also central to my writing because I'm interested in travel and how we define ourselves through place and through relationships to other people. How when we look at someone else and we try to understand them, how do we then understand ourselves differently through understanding this other, right? So the proposed courses, I wrote 3 proposed courses. They're not the class I'm teaching, they're different courses. But they were all variations on that idea, different ways of thinking about those questions.
Okay. So while preparing for the course, you went to Nathaniel Hawthorne's residence. That's what the research about you. So how was that experience?
Well, actually, going to Hawthorne's house, I've actually been to 2 of Hawthorne's houses, one in Salem and one in Concord. But this summer, I visited the house in Concord, which was actually owned by the Emerson family, Ralph Waldo Emerson, a great friend of Henry David Thoreau, who's the next author we'll be reading. And I actually went to that house as part of NEH, it's the National Endowment for the Humanities, seminar. So we visited the homes of Hawthorne, the homes of Emerson. We visited the site of Henry David Thoreau's cabin. We walked through the streets of Concord. We stayed in the inn that Henry David Thoreau's relatives had lived in. So exploring this relationship between place and literature, right? And the ways that this one small community of Concord, Massachusetts, struggled with issues from labor rights to immigration to anti-racist and anti-slavery work, and the ways that these writers from this one small place shaped the ideas of the country, right? And how that place was part of their learning and their experience in the community there, how it shaped their ideas. So it was a whole 2-week seminar, actually, that involved really being where these writers were and experiencing place in these very sort of intensive ways, learning about the history. And I think you can probably see that already in class. I really like to bring the history and the place into the conversation with the literature.
I was recently reading up on the election, the 11th election. Very interesting.
Indeed.
About 65 million people voted for Hillary, around 60 million voted for Trump. But there were more than 100 million people who did not vote at all. So would you like to comment on something like that?
Well, it's interesting. New York State this year, the state that I live in, we celebrated the centennial of women's right to vote in our state this year. And actually very soon, in another 2 years, we'll celebrate the right of women to vote in the United States as a nation in 2019. But it does seem that there are still a lot of people who don't want to vote, who either feel that the vote is pointless. I think you talk to a lot of people who say, well, it doesn't really matter, particularly if they are Republicans in a Democratic majority state or Democrats in a Republican majority state. They feel, well, why does it matter? My candidate is never going to win. Or they say, well, it doesn't matter. My candidate is going to win because the state always votes Republican or the state always votes Democrat. So I think this is part of it. But I also think people feel very disconnected from the candidates in this particular election. I think there wasn't a lot of widespread enthusiasm for either of the majority major party candidates. And so that also, I heard a lot of my students saying, well, I don't want either of them. So there's a lot of conversation about should you, quote, throw away your vote and vote third party, or should you just not vote at all? I think it's a mix of people feeling there's no point, or people feeling that, well, it's going to go a certain way anyway. But there's also a lot of people who like to identify themselves as not political, right? Which unfortunately tends to either mean that they feel so disenfranchised that they don't really feel that they have a voice, or they are feeling so entitled that they can say, I'm not political, because they believe that their interests will be served anyway, right? They don't feel that they have a big stake in it. So I think there's a whole range of reasons that people don't become involved politically, and particularly with electoral politics. In the US, there's also this sense of politics are dirty business, right? People say, oh, I'm not political, I don't like to get involved with that, they're all corrupt. So I think that's sometimes an excuse for not being involved.
Okay, so in the garage house movement, which I think is the newsletter of sorts at your
Yes, yeah.
college. So it says that you did a lot of kayaking in the summer. I read places, kayaking, and also so the yeah. So is it just like a one-off thing, or is it like a serious hobby?
No, it's a serious hobby, yeah. I really enjoy kayaking. I have 2 kayaks. I spend a lot of time in California, where I have family, and also in Connecticut, where I have family, kayaking on the coast there. And in New York, I kayak on the rivers and the lakes. I'm very enthusiastic about outdoor sports, especially water sports. I'm a big scuba diver and snorkeler as well. If it involves the water, I'm interested in it, although I don't really like motorized things, jet skis, right, or power boats don't interest me, but swimming and snorkeling and kayaking, that is what makes me most happy.
I think there is a kayaking company in Goa, so I think you might be
I think so, and I'm going to be looking for them. Yeah.
So the newsletter also mentions that you plan on staying in India for a while and traveling maybe. So what places do you have in mind?
Oh, I don't know yet, actually. I'm hoping to learn more and ask people. I stopped in Mumbai on the way here, and I plan to go back. I also have a conference I'm going to in New Delhi in February, so I will get to see a little bit of that area. But I still want to talk to people who are from different parts of India and learn about different areas, and then figure out where I want to go. I may go, of course, to the Andamans to do some scuba diving, that's definitely on my on my list of wishes. But I still want to just meet people and find out where they're from and why I should go to wherever it is that they love. You know, I think place is so important. You know, and experiencing the places that people care about and the culture and the landscape and the natural environment that people come from. That's a really really important thing for me for understanding people.
Right, well, that's all it is. That those are all the questions that I have for you. So thank you for your patience and your time. I appreciate it.
I'm happy to do it.